$250,000. Cover of Playboy. A star at WrestleMania. This was the fantasy WWE sold to the world. But here's the reality. A fractured ankle, a spine full of stress fractures, and a horrific secret from a military tour. A secret she claimed her bosses told her to bury. Her name was Ashley Massaro. What is the price of being the perfect diva when your real life is a nightmare? Ashley Massaro was born in 1979 in Babylon, New York. She grew up with her parents and older brother, a working-class Long Island kid. She was smart, too. She headed off to the State University of New York at Albany, studying for a degree in communications. But her life took a sharp, defining turn in 2000. She had her daughter, Alexa. Suddenly, she wasn't just a student, she was a single mother. The priority wasn't a comms degree, it was survival. It was building a life for her child. So she did what she had to do. She used her looks, working as a glamour model and competing in bikini pageants like Miss Hawaiian Tropic. That's who she was in 2005. A 26-year-old mom with tattoos, a genuine passion for punk rock, and a desperate need for a break. And the world she was about to enter was tailor-made for what she was selling. This was the mid-2000s, and World Wrestling Entertainment, or WWE, was in a very strange, very specific phase. They called it the Diva era. This wasn't about who was the best wrestler. It was about who looked the best. The women were still expected to take brutal, bone-jarring falls and work an inhuman schedule. But their primary function, as dictated from the very top, was to be objects of desire. They were eye candy, first and foremost. The women's matches were often named Fulfill Your Fantasy Lingerie Pillow Fights, or Bra and Panties matches, where the goal was to strip your opponent down to their underwear. The message from management was crystal clear. Your athletic skill is secondary. Your look is why you are here. And the gateway to this world, the main pipeline for new female talent, it was a reality show, the Diva Search. The Diva Search was a pageant, plain and simple, but with a WWE twist. It was part Miss America, part American Idol, and part fraternity house hazing. Young women, mostly from modeling backgrounds, would compete in televised segments. They weren't judged on wrestling ability, they were judged on their look, their charisma, and, quite frankly, how good they looked in a bikini. The contests were often deliberately humiliating. One week it might be a talent show, the next a bikini-clad car wash. The audience would then vote via text message for who got to stay. It was a spectacle of disposability. And the prize for enduring this? The winner was handed a $250,000 contract. But there was a catch. They weren't sent to a developmental training school to learn the craft. The winner was thrown directly onto live international television, often the very next week. It was a golden ticket, a promise of instant fame and fortune. But it was also a lion's den. You were expected to learn an incredibly dangerous, complex craft on the fly in front of millions with no prior experience. Not only that, you were walking into a locker room filled with women who had not come from a reality show, women who had scratched and clawed for years, who had earned their spot. The tension was palpable. The Diva Search girls were seen as a joke, as bikini models who were taking the spots of real women wrestlers. The Diva Search wasn't looking for a wrestler. It was looking for a star, a disposable, replaceable star. And in the summer of 2005, this high-pressure, high-stakes contest found its perfect candidate, a 26-year-old single mom from Long Island who had nothing to lose and a $250,000 future to gain. Ashley Massaro grew up on Long Island, tough, working class, and hungry for something bigger. Like many young, beautiful women in that environment, she was drawn to the world of glamour, to the idea of being seen, of making it out. She began modeling, competing in pageants like Miss Hawaiian Tropic, and working as a glamour model. This wasn't the high-fashion world of Vogue. It was the world of bikini calendars and magazine spreads, a world that ran parallel to the one WWE was selling. But Ashley was never just the girl next door. She was the cool girl next door. She was steeped in the punk and rock music scene of New York. Music was her passion. She had tattoos, a spray of stars here, a dragon there, at a time when that was still considered alternative and not mainstream. She wasn't the polished blonde prototype that the company usually favored. She was, as she would later be branded, the rocker chick. She felt authentic. She wasn't trying to be a lady. She was a chick. And in 2005, that distinction was everything. In 2005, at 26 years old, she saw an ad for the third WWE Diva Search. It was a long shot, but the prize money was life-changing. She auditioned, and from the moment she appeared on screen, she was a breath of fresh air. In a sea of identical-looking hopefuls who all seemed to be reading from a script, Ashley stood out. She had this raw, unpolished, infectious energy. She wasn't afraid to be a little goofy, a little loud. When she flubbed a line, she'd laugh at herself. The fans connected with her instantly. And let's look at who she was up against. The other finalists were women like Crystal Marshall and Layla Milani, beautiful, polished, quintessential models. Ashley, with her rock t-shirts and her slightly too loud laugh, looked like someone you'd actually meet at a bar. The crowd felt like she was one of them. While other contestants were being booed out of the arena, Ashley was getting cheered. She was the people's choice. On August 15th, 2005, live on Monday Night Raw, she was declared the winner. She stood in the ring, tears streaming down her face, a $250,000 contract in her hand. It was the fairy tale. The dream had come true. She had made it. And then the machine kicked in, and it kicked in with a vengeance. There was no time to celebrate, no time to train. Her first night on Raw as a contracted diva, she was thrown into a segment with the Vince's Devils, a stable of mean girl veterans. Victoria, Candice Michelle, and Tori Wilson. Her first storyline? The veterans were jealous of the new girl. It was a classic but cynical playbook. The veterans, who could actually wrestle, were booked as the evil, jealous shrews, and Ashley, the model who couldn't, was the plucky, innocent babyface. The very first angle she was in, Victoria, Candice, and Tori cornered her in the locker room, insulted her, and well, it ended in a bra and panties match. Of course it did. She was immediately on night one defined by her sexiness, not her toughness. Her first major storyline saw her teaming up with one of the most popular women in wrestling history, Trish Stratus, and the equally popular Lita. But this also meant she was in the ring, live on television, with some of the company's most vicious and experienced veterans, like Victoria and Candice Michelle. To say she was green would be a kindness. She was a model, not an athlete. She was learning on the job in the most high-pressure, dangerous environment imaginable. And the veterans in the locker room, some were kind. Trish Stratus, by all accounts, tried to take her under her wing, but others were not so welcoming. There's an old-school mentality in wrestling. If you're new, and especially if you're seen as ungrateful or unworthy, the veterans will welcome you. They'll hit you a little harder. They'll be a little less careful with your body. They call it stretching you or working stiff. For a brand new girl who didn't even know how to fall, it must have been terrifying. And then, just as she was finding her footing, the physical toll began. In early 2006, just a few months into her career, she suffered a severe spiral fracture in her fibula and a dislocated ankle. It was a nasty, legitimate injury. It wasn't part of a story. She needed surgery. She had a plate and screws put in her leg. She was out just like that for months. For anyone else, especially a Diva Search winner, that would have been a career death sentence. You're gone, you're forgotten, they find a new model. The company, however, saw her as a massive star, but in a shocking twist, they didn't forget her. Vince McMahon, it seemed, was personally invested in her success. While she was injured, they kept running vignettes, Ashley's Road to WrestleMania. It was unheard of. They were holding her spot for the biggest show of the year. This showed just how much faith they had in her as a marketable face. They loved her look, her energy, and the way the fans, especially the male fans, responded to her. So they pushed her hard. In April 2006, less than 8 months after winning the Diva Search and coming right off that catastrophic ankle injury, Ashley Massaro was given a match for the WWE Women's Championship at WrestleMania 22. Now let's put this in perspective. WrestleMania is the Super Bowl of professional wrestling. It's the biggest event of the year, with tens of thousands of people in the stadium and millions watching worldwide. There are wrestlers who work their entire lives, toiling in bingo halls, breaking bones for 20 quid, and never get a championship match on that stage. Ashley, the model from New York, was handed this opportunity in her rookie year. It was a sign of the company's massive faith in her, not as a wrestler, but as a brand. The context of the other women's match on that WrestleMania card, it was Tori Wilson versus Candice Michelle in a Playboy pillow fight. That was the gimmick match. Ashley was given the championship match. In the twisted logic of the Diva era, this was WWE's version of showing respect. They were splitting their bets. One match for TNA, one match for their new star, Ashley. The match itself was part of a larger, much celebrated story between Trish Stratus and Mickie James. Ashley was, in many ways, the third wheel, but she was on the poster. She was at the top of the mountain. And this, it turned out, was only the beginning of her mainstream crossover. She came back from her broken ankle, had her WrestleMania moment, and the company just kept the rocket strapped to her back. She wasn't just a wrestler, she was their ambassador. In 2007, Ashley hit her absolute apex. She was chosen to be the face of the brand's long-standing and very lucrative partnership with Playboy magazine. This was a huge deal, a massive deal. For WWE, it was a vital part of their business model. It got them mainstream press, it got them into news agents and onto talk shows where they were normally ignored. Only the company's top diva was given the cover, and the media blitz was huge. She was on Access Hollywood, E! News, she was everywhere, and she was good at it. She was charming, she was funny, she could handle herself. This, for WWE, was gold. And it led to more. She appeared in a music video for Timbaland, Throw It On Me, alongside the Hives. She was cool. She was bridging the gap. Her WrestleMania 23 match off the back of this Playboy cover was another huge spot. It was for the Women's Championship again, this time against Melina, a fantastic in-ring performer who hated being seen as just a diva. The match was booked as a lumberjill match, which meant all the other divas surrounded the ring. It was a chaotic spectacle, designed to get every woman on the show and to get Ashley's Playboy cover on the broadcast. She didn't win, but that didn't matter. She was the star of the show. Ashley was now in the same category as superstars like Sable, Chyna, and Tori Wilson. She was officially the company's #1 woman. The girl from the Diva Search had proven to be the company's best investment. But WWE wasn't done. They wanted to push her beyond the wrestling bubble. They wanted a mainstream household name. And in late 2007, they found the perfect vehicle. Later that same year, Ashley was cast on one of the biggest reality shows on the planet, Survivor, China. WWE placed her on Survivor, China. This was a contractual thing. She didn't just decide to do it. The company saw it as another PR home run, but they miscalculated. They took their glamour model, who was already running on fumes from an inhuman travel schedule, and dropped her in the middle of rural China with no food, no comfort, and no support system. This wasn't a WWE-controlled environment. This was reality, and the reality was brutal. This is an untold part of her story. We saw the smiling, tough-as-nails girl on TV, but the reality of the experience was brutal. Ashley was not prepared for the harsh conditions. She got severely ill very quickly. She was dealing with massive dehydration and a crippling illness. It was a disaster. She got so ill that the Survivor medical team was genuinely concerned. This wasn't playing for the cameras. She was physically falling apart. She was the second person voted off the island, lasting only 6 days. In interviews years later, she would describe the experience as utterly miserable. She was sick, she was starving, and she was thousands of miles from her young daughter. All she could think about was how far away she was. She had gone from the top of the wrestling world, the Playboy cover girl, to being humiliated and portrayed as weak on national television. It was a jarring public dose of reality. And when she returned to WWE from her Survivor excursion, she found that in her short absence, the machine had already started to move on. That's the cruelest part of the Diva system. It has a high turnover. It's a "what have you done for me lately" business. The moment she was no longer the new shiny thing, the moment the Playboy promotion was over, her star began to fade. And when she got back to WWE, the entire landscape had shifted. In her short absence, a new woman had debuted, Beth Phoenix. The Glamazon? Beth was the anti-diva. She was tall, she was powerful, she was muscular. She wasn't a model, she was a beast. And the fans loved her. The diva era was, ever so slowly, starting to curdle. The audience was getting tired of the bikini models. And Ashley, the queen of the bikini models, suddenly looked like yesterday's news. She was moved from the flagship show, Raw, to the B show, SmackDown. Her storylines became less important. She was no longer competing for championships. She was put into the role of a valet, a manager for a tag team. This is where the story gets both sad and strange. Her demotion to managing Paul London and Brian Kendrick was a sign of this. Here were two of the most gifted, high-flying athletes on the roster, and they were saddled with a Playboy model as their valet in a storyline that made no sense. It was a creative dead end for all three of them. And then the injuries came back, and they were bad. In early 2008, during a match, she fell badly from the top rope. Another legitimate, nasty injury. She was out again. But this time, there were no Road to WrestleMania vignettes. There was just silence. She was damaged goods. The machine that had prized her look now saw her as unreliable, as injury-prone. Her last few months with the company were a shadow. She'd return from injury and be thrown into meaningless 2-minute 8-diva tag matches on Raw, the kind of match designed to get everyone on TV for 30 seconds and then be instantly forgotten. She had gone from the WrestleMania Championship match and the cover of Playboy to being the most disposable person on the roster. The fall was as fast as the rise. Then, on July 9th, 2008, almost 3 years after her dream began, WWE announced that Ashley Massaro had been released from her contract. The public story was that she requested her release to care for her young daughter, Alexa, who had fallen ill. It was a noble, human, and deeply relatable reason. And this story was 100% true. Her daughter was sick and needed her. And Ashley, the devoted single mother, made the only choice she could. She asked for her release. It was an act of genuine love. People respected her for it. She was a mother first. But underneath that truth, there was a much darker, more complex reality. She wasn't just leaving for her daughter. She was escaping. She was escaping a body that was shattered, a career that had stalled, and a place that held the darkest secret of her life. She was leaving because she was broken. She was suffering from severe burnout. She was nursing a catalog of injuries, and as the world would learn, almost a decade later, she was carrying a secret so horrific it had already begun to destroy her from the inside out. The dirty diva was a character. The Playboy cover was a job. The Survivor contestant was a contractual obligation. But the person was Ashley. The absolute, undisputed center of her universe was her daughter, Alexa. She was born in 2000, and Ashley was a single mother. Every single decision she made, from the pageants to the Diva Search itself, was to build a better life for her. She was, by all accounts, a doting, fiercely protective mother. And this is where the real pain of the job set in, long before the injuries. The pain of the WWE road, the 300 days a year, wasn't just physical fatigue. It was the gut-wrenching pain of being away from her child. Think about what that schedule actually means for a single mother. It means missing birthdays. It means missing the first day of school. It means saying goodnight over a crackly mobile phone from a hotel room in Des Moines, or Tokyo, or London. It means a constant grinding guilt that you are paying for your child's future by sacrificing her present. Every time she got on a plane, she was leaving the one person who mattered most to her in the world. Her friends, other wrestlers from that era, all say the same thing. Maria Kanellis, a fellow Diva Search contestant, and one of her closest friends said, Ashley was all light. She was the one who would check in on you, the one who would see you looking down in the locker room, come over and ask how you were doing, even when she herself was clearly struggling. The Bella twins, who came into the company as Ashley was at her peak, described her as the most welcoming, sweet soul, the one who offered them advice when no one else would. Mick Foley, a hardened legend of the business, called her unbelievably sweet. This is the classic heartbreaking paradox of so many who suffer in silence. She was the life of the party, the person who lit up the room, the shoulder everyone else leaned on. It's almost as if, by being the light for everyone else, she could somehow keep her own darkness at bay. She was trying to build a new family on the road to replace the one she was forced to leave at home. And her escape, her one true piece of personal identity, was her music. That rocker chick thing wasn't a gimmick. She was a rocker chick. Her social media was a constant stream of her at concerts. Metallica, Audio Slave, The Used. It was the one place where she wasn't Ashley Massaro the diva. She was just Ash, a fan in the crowd screaming along to her favorite songs. It was the one part of her life that the machine hadn't co-opted. That was the real Ashley, and that real person was in constant, agonizing pain. Ashley was not a trained wrestler. She was a model, thrown into one of the most physically demanding, high-impact jobs on earth. And the schedule, as we've said, was inhuman. It's not just the 3-hour show you see on TV, it's the travel. It's performing in one city, taking a hard fall, maybe getting a concussion. It's finishing the match, your ears ringing, your vision blurry. It's getting a bag of ice from the trainer, then getting in a rental car with 4 other people. It's driving 300 miles through the night, maybe grabbing a Burger King on the way to the next town. It's grabbing 3 hours of sleep in a cheap hotel, waking up, finding a gym to look the part, getting on a plane to another city, and doing it all over again. 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. There is no off season. And when you're green, when you don't know how to fall properly, every single bump hurts more. Every impact rattles your bones. The injuries don't just happen, they pile up, one on top of the other until your entire body is a symphony of pain. In her later legal filings, Ashley would catalog the damage. It wasn't just bumps and bruises, it was catastrophic. a fractured ankle so severe it required a 5-inch plate and 9 screws. That was the injury in early 2006. She should have been out for a year, letting it heal, doing proper rehab. But WrestleMania was coming. The company had plans for her, so she was rushed back. She came back in just a couple of months, her ankle still screaming, to have her WrestleMania moment. That injury never healed properly, and when one part of your body is that damaged, you compensate. You run the ropes differently. You land on your other leg, and then that leg starts to break down. Her list of injuries is horrifying. Multiple repeated concussions, stress fractures in her spine, herniated discs. She alleged that she was suffering from the classic terrifying symptoms of long-term brain trauma, or CTE, severe memory loss, crippling migraines, constant high-pitched ringing in her ears, and a deep, dark depression she couldn't shake. And in that era, the mid-2000s, this was before the world was really talking about concussions. This was before the Chris Benoit tragedy forced the company to change. In 2006, getting a concussion wasn't a medical emergency, it was getting your bell rung. You were expected to shake it off, to get back in there. In her affidavit, Ashley claimed she was knocked unconscious multiple times in the ring, only to be evaluated by a company-affiliated doctor backstage, given a superficial exam, and then cleared to wrestle again, sometimes the very next night. She was a model, not an athlete, being told to ignore the very warning signs that her brain was in serious trouble. So what did she do? She was in constant radiating pain. Her head was pounding. Her back was on fire. She was thousands of miles from home. She was desperately lonely. And she had a show to do tomorrow. She didn't have a choice. She did what she was told. She went to the company doctor, who she alleged was the only medical care she was allowed to see. And this doctor's job wasn't to heal her. It was to get her to the next town. It was to get her in the ring. So she alleged they would just hand out prescriptions for painkillers and muscle relaxers like they were sweets. Somas, Vicodin, whatever it took. It was a take this, you'll be fine culture. She took the pills to numb the physical pain, just enough so she could take the next fall, and the next, and the next. And then there was the other pain, the loneliness, the guilt, the depression, the adrenaline from the show. That 2-hour high of the cheering crowd would wear off around 2 a.m. She'd be back in her empty, sterile hotel room. The silence was deafening. And in that silence, all the things she'd been running from, they all came crashing in. She was a mother, and she was not with her child. She was a superstar, and she was completely, totally alone. This was her reality. She was 27 years old, but her body felt like it was 60. Her head was pounding 24 hours a day. She alleged in her legal filings that she couldn't remember simple things like where she left her keys or what she was supposed to do that day. She was living in what she called a fog. She was suffering from memory loss. She was scared. She was thousands of miles from her daughter, her only support system. She was living on a diet of painkillers and, by her own account, regret. And her job demanded that she go out in front of 15,000 people in her underwear and pretend to be a happy-go-lucky, sexy, rebellious rocker chick. This was the contradiction at the heart of her life, a soul-crushing psychological dissonance, the pressure to perform, to be on, to be the Playboy fantasy, while she was, by her own account, physically and emotionally disintegrating. And in that era, she couldn't complain. She couldn't. Especially not as a Diva Search girl. She was an outsider from day one. She hadn't paid her dues. She was already seen as lucky, as ungrateful. She was being paid $250,000 to live the dream. Complaining about being hurt? That was a sign of weakness. That was a way to get heat in the locker room. That was a way to confirm to all the veterans that you didn't belong. It was a way to lose your spot, to be replaced by the next girl from the next Diva Search. So she was completely isolated. The very people who might have understood the physical pain, the other women, saw her as the enemy. And the company which was supposed to protect her just saw her as a product. She was allegedly told to work through the pain, that this was part of the business. So she did. She smiled, she signed autographs, she took pictures for Playboy, she took the pills. She hid her pain from her friends, from her fans, and from the world. She was isolated, physically broken, emotionally drained, already living in darkness. And then, in 2006, on a trip that was supposed to be a patriotic goodwill tour, her entire world collapsed. In December 2006, Ashley, along with other top WWE stars like John Cena, was flown to Kuwait for the annual tribute to the troops. This was and is a massive PR event for the company. It's a cornerstone of their corporate identity. In the post 9/11, support the troops era of the 2000s, this partnership with the U.S. military was invaluable. It painted the company as a patriotic, all-American institution. The wrestlers visit bases, sign autographs, and put on a show in a combat zone. These trips were a massive, massive deal, but they were also chaotic. They were on a live military base in a war zone. The security is different. It's not a controlled arena. It's a sprawling foreign compound. And the role of the divas on these trips? Let's be blunt. It was to be a beautiful, smiling face for thousands of lonely men far from home. The pressure to be on, to be friendly, to be approachable was immense. She was a corporate ambassador in a highly charged, overwhelmingly male environment. It was a powder keg of unspoken expectations. From the outside, it's a noble, patriotic gesture. But what Ashley Massaro alleged happened on that trip is the dark, beating, and furiously contested heart of this entire tragedy. For a decade, she said nothing, not publicly. But in 2017, her name appeared on a document that would rock the wrestling world. It was a wide-ranging class action lawsuit against the WWE. Now, this lawsuit wasn't about the assault. It was primarily about concussions. It was a large group of former wrestlers claiming the company had knowingly, for decades, failed to protect them from neurological injuries, that they'd hidden the risks of brain trauma. Ashley's affidavit was part of this. It was, in essence, her complete testimony of all the trauma she claimed WWE inflicted on her, the physical and the psychological. And tucked inside this document, which was mainly about her broken body and her concussion symptoms, she unleashed her story. It's a harrowing, deeply disturbing read. She alleged that on that tour in Kuwait, she was drugged and violently sexually assaulted by a man who was posing as a U.S. military doctor. This detail is important. She wasn't alleging she was assaulted by a U.S. soldier. She was alleging she was assaulted by an imposter who had gained access to her in this chaotic foreign environment. She claimed he told her he needed to examine her, as she'd been feeling unwell. He took her to a small room, injected her with an unknown substance, and that she was rendered unconscious. She alleged that she was then, in her words, brutalized. She alleged that when she regained consciousness sometime later, she was visibly distraught, in pain, disoriented, and she was bleeding. She claimed she was taken to a trailer where she was met by several WWE executives and officials who were on the trip, including CEO Vince McMahon, head of talent relations John Laurinaitis, and the producer Kevin Dunn. Now, this is the part of the story that moves from a personal tragedy to a massive corporate controversy. This is the allegation that cuts to the bone. According to Ashley's sworn statement, she told them exactly what happened. She was hysterical. She was in shock. She was terrified, and she was on a foreign military base surrounded by armed guards. She was looking for help. She was looking for protection from her employers. Instead, she alleged, she was met with a chillingly cold corporate response. She claimed the executives, including McMahon himself, held a private meeting right then and there to discuss the repercussions of her allegation, and that after this meeting, she was told in no uncertain terms to sweep it under the rug. She alleged they told her that reporting this to military officials would be disastrous for the company, that it would severely damage the WWE's multi-million-dollar relationship with the U.S. military. She claimed they explicitly told her it was not in the best interests of the company for her to speak about. In her own words, she was discouraged from making any report. This was the psychological horror of her allegation. The power dynamic was absolute. She was 27 years old. He was Vince McMahon, a billionaire, the man who owned her career, who owned her dream. She was in a foreign country, a war zone, thousands of miles from her daughter. To her, these men were not just her bosses. They were her ride home. They were her only lifeline. And she alleged that in that moment, her lifeline was cut. She claimed they flew her back to the UE days later, but not to her own doctor, not to a hospital. She alleged she was taken to a WWE-affiliated doctor who she claimed examined her, agreed she had been assaulted, but did not conduct a rape kit. And, she alleged, this doctor, an employee of the company, reiterated the same corporate line. Do not report this. She claimed that from that moment on, she was a wreck. She said this incident was the genesis of her severe, debilitating depression, her anxiety, her PTSD, and her subsequent drug and alcohol abuse. She had been violated. And then, she alleged, she had been systematically silenced by the very people who were supposed to protect her. She carried this secret for over 10 years, and she claimed it ate her alive. When this affidavit hit the public in 2017, it was a bomb. But it was a muffled bomb. It was reported mostly by wrestling-specific news sites. Online, in forums, and on Twitter, fans were horrified. How could this happen? And how could Vince McMahon, the man on TV, be personally involved in a cover-up? But it was also part of that very large, very messy class action lawsuit. WWE's powerful legal team was in full attack mode, painting all the wrestlers in the suit, many of whom were older and suffering, as disgruntled, broke, and looking for a quick payout. Ashley's story, as horrific as it was, got bundled in with all the other claims. It was 2017, the same year the hashtag #MeToo movement exploded. But there was no hashtag #MeToo moment for Ashley. Her colleagues, most of whom were still employed by WWE or had lucrative Legends contracts, were completely silent. You didn't speak out against Vince McMahon and survive in that business. So, while the fans were disgusted, the story was successfully contained by the company as just another bogus legal claim. And then came the company's official denial. And this was, in many ways, the second great controversy. Now, we must present the other side. This is the debate, and it is a stark, absolute contradiction. When this affidavit became public, WWE issued a very strong and very specific denial. They called her allegations false. They called her lawyers' claims salacious and false. They agreed that she had reported an incident, but their version of events is completely different. They claimed that when they were told of the incident in 2006, they did take it seriously. They claimed that Vince McMahon and other executives did meet with her and that they immediately reported the incident to the U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Command, CID. This is a key point. They were in effect saying, we have a paper trail. We are the good guys here. Here's where the stories diverge completely. This is the part that is truly chilling. WWE claimed that Ashley, in a later meeting, told them she was confused, that she may have just gotten drunk, and that she felt it was her own fault. Their defense, their public statement, is that their employee, their 27-year-old Diva, got drunk, thought she was assaulted, reported it, and then after sobering up said, "Oops, my mistake, it was my fault." They claimed they offered to fly her home, but she refused, wanting to finish the tour and not let the troops down. They stated, and I quote, "At no time was Ms. Massaro ever told not to report the alleged incident, to sweep it under the rug, or that reporting it would be bad for business." So, what we are left with is an impossible, heartbreaking chasm. On one side, we have the sworn 36-page legal affidavit of a woman filed under oath, detailing a horrific trauma and a subsequent corporate cover-up, which she claimed was the source of her life-ending depression. On the other, we have the flat-out categorical denial from a multi-billion-dollar corporation, which states they did everything by the book and that the victim herself recanted and blamed herself. So who do you believe? Do you believe the woman who, by 2017, was admittedly suffering from depression, memory loss, and addiction, and who was part of a lawsuit seeking financial damages? This is what the company's lawyers would and did lean on, that she was an unreliable narrator motivated by money? Or do you believe the corporation, which had $1 billion brand-defining relationship with the military to protect? A corporation that, in their own denial, paints a picture of a victim who immediately recanted and blamed herself. This, as any expert will tell you, is a classic and tragically common response to trauma. But WWE, in their telling, didn't use this as a sign of her trauma. They used it as a defense. Their version of the story is, in its own way, just as dark as Ashley's. Their "we did nothing wrong" defense relies on the idea that she was a confused drunk girl who thought she was assaulted but wasn't. It's an incredibly ugly picture, no matter which side you look at. The entire lawsuit, the one that Ashley's affidavit was part of, was eventually dismissed by a federal judge in 2018. And this is the final corporate tragedy. This is the part that gets lost in the headlines. It wasn't dismissed because her claims were proven false. It wasn't dismissed because WWE's version of events was proven true. It was dismissed on a legal technicality that the statute of limitations had run out. In simple terms, the judge ruled they had all waited too long to sue. This is a common and very effective legal strategy. By getting the case thrown out on a technicality, the company avoided the process of discovery. That means their internal emails were never subpoenaed. Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis never had to sit for a deposition about this. The company's version of events and Ashley's were never cross-examined under oath in a courtroom. Her allegations and the company's denials were never tested in a court of law. The truth was never litigated. It all just went away. After she left WWE in 2008, Ashley's life was a quiet, desperate struggle. The big money was gone. The fame was fading. She had her daughter, who was the light of her life. But she was also battling, as she would later state in her legal filings, the demons of her past and the chronic, agonizing pain of her present. She tried to make a comeback. She wrestled on the independent scene in high school gyms and small halls for a fraction of the money. You've had a championship match at WrestleMania in front of 80,000 people. You've been on the cover of Playboy. And now you're driving yourself 5 hours to a National Guard armory to wrestle for 50 quid and a handshake, all while your spine feels like it's on fire. She was trying to recapture the magic, but the magic had left the building. She even had a brief run in the number 2 company, TNA, But it was short-lived. The business just wasn't the same for her. So she tried to build a new life, a real one. She went back to school. And what did she study? She was studying to become a veterinarian. This wasn't some vanity project. It was a beautiful, powerful sign of who she was. She wasn't the dirty diva. She was a woman who loved animals, who wanted a life of healing, of caring for things. It was the complete opposite of the shallow, brutal world that had broken her. And if you looked at her public life, her social media, you'd never know she was struggling. She was active on Instagram and Twitter, and her feeds were a sea of positivity. Pictures of her daughter, Alexa, who was growing into a beautiful young woman. Pictures of her pets, her friends, rock concerts, inspirational quotes about staying strong and loving life. This is the part of the story that's so tragically modern. We now know that in 2017, when she filed that 36-page affidavit detailing a life of unimaginable trauma, pain, addiction, and depression, her Instagram feed from that exact same period was all smiles, rock and roll, and love ya messages. She was a master of the mask. She was, to all outside observers, fine. She was a survivor. She was the one who got out. She was at wrestling conventions, always with a huge smile, always having the most time for her fans, charging less than anyone else for an autograph. She was still, in every public sense, Ashley all light. But the lawsuit, her one final desperate attempt to have her story heard, had failed. The case, this massive class action suit, was dismissed by a federal judge in September 2018. As we said, it was on a technicality, the statute of limitations. In simple terms, the judge looked at this mountain of pain and said, "You waited too long." Imagine what that does to a person. It wasn't just a legal loss, it was a profound systemic invalidation. It was the world, the system, officially telling her that her trauma didn't matter, that her pain had an expiration date and she'd missed it. The company, of course, claimed victory. They released a statement calling the lawsuit frivolous and without merit. To them, it was just a business win. To Ashley, it must have felt like the last door in the world slamming shut in her face. The one place she had turned to for justice had just confirmed her worst fear, that she was on her own. The system, she must have felt, had failed her again. The world moved on. And that's a very important date, September 2018. She was now left with her pain, her trauma, her broken body, and the official legal stamp that none of it was anyone's fault but her own. She continued for 8 more months, 8 long months in that new reality. On May 15th, 2019, she was on Twitter. She was replying to dozens of fans who had sent her old photos, their fan mail. Her last tweet, her last public message to the world, wasn't a cry for help. It was an act of giving. She wrote, "Just answered a ton of fan mail, so you guys should be receiving them soon. Love ya." She was, right up until the very end, still being the light for everyone else, still taking care of her fans. Hours later, she was found in her home in Suffolk County, New York. A 911 call came in for an unresponsive female. By the time EMTs arrived, it was too late. The next morning, on May 16th, 2019, the news broke like a thunderclap. Ashley Massaro was dead by suicide just 10 days shy of her 40th birthday. That milestone, 40, it's a heavy one for anyone. It's a moment of reflection. And for someone whose entire public identity was based on being the 26-year-old rocker chick, a Playboy model, for that person to be turning 40 in constant pain, with her legal case dismissed, it must have loomed like a tidal wave. The news hit the wrestling world like a shockwave. It wasn't just sadness, it was a profound collective shock. The public reaction was one of grief, but also of deep, dark confusion. Fans, the very ones she had just replied to, were horrified. They were waiting by their mailboxes for an autograph from a woman who was already gone. Her Instagram comments section, once a place for "you look amazing" and "rock on," instantly became a digital memorial, a sea of "I'm so sorry, we didn't know," and "this can't be real." But underneath the shock, a new dark emotion began to bubble up. It was anger. Fans were asking, "Oh, how? How does this happen?" And their anger quickly found a target. WWE, the company at the center of her life and her pain, released a cold standard corporate tweet. "We are saddened to learn of the tragic death of former WWE superstar Ashley Massaro. WWE extends its condolences to Ashley's family and friends." That was it. Saddened to learn. Former superstar. There was no 10-bell salute on Monday Night Raw. There was no "in memory of" video package celebrating her career. The machine just kept on rolling. And that silence, that corporate coldness infuriated the public. It felt disrespectful. It felt guilty. It made them dig. Why was the company being so cold? Why were they treating her like a distant, barely remembered employee? And that digging led them straight back to the 2017 affidavit. And a chilling universal theme emerged from her friends and peers. Every single person who knew her said the same thing. But she was always so happy. She was the sweetest, most positive person. I just spoke to her. She seemed fine. Hardened legend Mick Foley tweeted, "This is awful news." Ashley Massaro, she was so nice and always had a smile. My heart goes out to her family. Her old rival, Victoria, wrote, "My heart is broken. I have no words." Her closest friends, women who came up with her, were shattered. Tori Wilson, her Playboy predecessor, called her a sweet, kind soul. The Bella twins, who Ashley had mentored when they were the new girls, said she had the most welcoming, sweet soul. This "I just spoke to her" wasn't just a statement of fact, it was a question. How did I miss this? It was the ultimate tragic confirmation of the mask she had been forced to wear for more than a decade. She had become so adept at hiding her pain, at being the light for everyone else, that no one saw how dark it had become for her. This wasn't a person who gave up. This was a person who had been fighting alone in a war no one else could see, and she was just tired. And her death did something her lawsuit never could. It reopened all the wounds. Suddenly, those allegations from her affidavit, the ones that were dismissed and forgotten by the media in 2018, were everywhere. They were republished in full by major news outlets. This is the sick, cynical truth of the media. When she was alive and suing, she was a disgruntled former employee. She was part of a frivolous lawsuit. The media barely touched it. But now that she was dead it was a harrowing, tragic story. Now, her words had weight. Suddenly, her story wasn't just a dismissed lawsuit. It was a potential harrowing explanation. Her death, in the most tragic way possible, finally got the world to listen. A little over a year after her death, in the summer of 2020, the wrestling world was rocked by the speaking out movement. Inspired by the broader #MeToo movement, hundreds of women and men came forward with their own stories of abuse, harassment, and assault within the industry. It was a dam-breaking moment, a furious reckoning that exposed the dark, unregulated, and often predatory underbelly of the business. Ashley Massaro's legacy isn't one of championships. It's one of warning. She was the precursor to speaking out, a woman who used the legal system to tell her story only to be dismissed on a technicality. Her life puts a permanent stain on the diva era, ending the nostalgia and forcing a question of its real human cost. Her final selfless act was pledging her brain to science, a desperate attempt to prove that her pain, the fog and memory loss, was physical and real. She was a devoted mother who won the reality TV lottery, but the prize was a mask she could never take off. By her own sworn account, she was a woman who deserved protection and was denied it. The world was given the fantasy of the dirty diva. The real Ashley was left to fight and die in silence. The full truth of what happened in that room in Kuwait remains buried. The only two parties who know are a silent multi-billion-dollar corporation and a woman who is no longer here to tell her story.